Throughout history, churches have been considered places of refuge, where people seek peace, comfort, and connection with the divine. However, there have been moments when these sanctuaries turned into unexpected scenes of chaos and fear. One such incident occurred in Ibagué, Colombia, where a sacred space was disrupted in a way that left many questioning the unseen forces at play. What happens when a place of prayer turns into a stage for terror? How do people react when confronted with a situation that challenges their faith and safety at the same time? The answer lies not only in human instinct, but also in the profound sense of spiritual conviction that guides those who step inside a church. While some may freeze in fear, others respond with courage, driven by the belief that divine protection is present even in the face of darkness. If you enjoy content that helps you grow spiritually, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and join our community for more inspiration. Let's get started. It was 6:30 a.m. in the parish of San Judas Tadeo, a church near the University of Tolima, where the morning mass and Christmas novena were being celebrated. The congregation, absorbed in prayer and reflection, listened to the homily of Father Alfonso Bonilla Aristizabal, who spoke with calm authority. The moment carried a sacred weight, a time to meditate on faith and devotion. Then, a sudden disturbance shattered the tranquility. A man, furious and shouting profanities, stormed into the church, his voice filled with rage. His words sent chills through the congregation, but what truly spread panic was his repeated declaration. In front of God's eyes, I'm going to kill 2 people today. His presence alone was alarming, yet as he moved closer to the altar, the tension escalated to sheer terror. The man, estimated to be in his early 30s, clutched a large knife, gripping it with clear intent. Fear rippled through the church as worshippers exchanged terrified glances. Some instinctively stepped back, clutching their rosaries tighter, while others whispered prayers, hoping for divine intervention. The priest, momentarily stunned, attempted to continue his homily, his voice steady yet cautious. As the intruder advanced, the murmurs turned into screams, the congregation frozen between flight and faith. Some clung to the belief that the church itself would protect them, that no harm could truly penetrate this sacred ground. Others, however, knew that action was necessary. Among them, a young acolyte saw the imminent danger and made a split-second decision to stand his ground and protect the altar. The tension in the church thickened as the man's words echoed through the sacred hall. His erratic movements, the intensity in his eyes, and the way he clenched the knife sent waves of dread through the congregation. Some had instinctively stepped back, creating a gap between the pews, while others remained frozen in their seats, eyes fixed on the unfolding horror. Fear grips us in ways we least expect, shaking the very foundations of what we believe to be safe. But in moments of uncertainty, where danger and faith collide, one question remains: what unseen forces are truly at work? Understanding the battle between light and darkness is more important now than ever. This is exactly what The Secret of Jesus' Apparitions offers: a path to clarity and peace through his revelations. This ebook goes into his prophecies and offers insight into what lies ahead. It's available for free in the pinned comment. Grab it now before the edition's gone. His breath was ragged, his chest rising and falling violently as he scanned the faces of the faithful. Then, as if possessed by an uncontrollable force, he took another step toward the altar. His grip on the blade tightened, his knuckles turning white. A woman gasped audibly, her hand flying to her mouth. Others clutched their loved ones, instinctively seeking protection. The priest, still standing firm near the pulpit, raised a calming hand, his voice unwavering. "Stay calm. Fear does not belong here." yet fear had already taken root. Then the man's voice erupted once more. "No one here understands. None of you see the truth." His words, erratic and disjointed, bounced off the high ceilings. His whole body trembled, his head jerking slightly, as if struggling against something unseen. The knife glinted under the dim church lights. Someone near the front row, an elderly man clutching a wooden cane, whispered a prayer under his breath. "Deliver us from evil, O Lord." His words, though barely audible, carried the weight of centuries of faith. The man suddenly lunged forward, crossing the open space between the pews and the altar steps in just a few strides. A scream broke through the silence as panic erupted. People scrambled backward, some nearly tripping over the benches. Mothers shielded their children, while others instinctively sought cover behind the church's massive columns. A sudden movement to the side, a young acolyte gripping a plastic chair, his arms tense, his jaw clenched. He swung it with all his strength, the force of the impact sending a sharp crack through the air. The chair collided with the attacker's arm, causing him to stumble for just a second. That second was all it took for a handful of men, elderly but resolute, to charge forward. The sudden rush of movement was swift but determined. A group of elderly men, their hands hardened by years of labor, lunged at the attacker, fueled by a mix of instinct and unwavering faith. The air crackled with tension as the assailant staggered from the impact of the chair, his grip on the knife momentarily loosening. One of the men grabbed his wrist, forcing his arm down with surprising strength. Another locked his arms around the attacker's shoulders, while a third went for his legs, pulling him to the ground with a heavy thud. A collective gasp swept through the congregation as the struggle intensified. The man thrashed violently, his body jerking with unnatural force, his screams turning guttural. "Let go of me! You don't understand! They sent me!" His voice, hoarse and frantic, sent a chill through those close enough to hear. His eyes, wild and unfocused, darted between the faces above him, pupils dilated. The knife, now just inches from his fingertips, gleamed under the dim church lights. Some truths reveal themselves in the most unexpected moments. A few copies of this exclusive ebook remain. Check the pinned comment before they're gone. One of the men pressing him down kicked the weapon aside, sending it skidding across the floor. Another, his breath labored from the struggle, pinned the attacker's arms to the cold stone ground. The priest, who had remained still up until that moment, stepped forward with quiet authority. He lifted his hand, his fingers closing around the silver crucifix hanging from his neck. "In the name of the Lord, be still." The command, spoken with solemn weight, sent a ripple through the space. The man's body convulsed beneath the grip of those restraining him, a guttural growl escaping his throat. His breathing turned erratic, then suddenly he fell silent. As if they were ready for another fight, the men holding him paused and tightened their grips. But the once violent figure now lay motionless, chest rising and falling rapidly, his eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. A hushed murmur spread through the congregation as tension gave way to bewilderment. A woman clutched her rosary tighter, whispering, "The devil trembles before his name." The attacker's fingers twitched. Then, as if a sudden spark reignited the madness within him, he let out a blood-curdling scream, thrashing once more beneath their hands. The scream ripped through the church, a sound so raw and guttural that it seemed to shake the very walls. The men restraining him flinched, their grips tightening as his body contorted in violent spasms. His breathing was erratic, his muscles tensed like coils ready to snap. His eyes, now bloodshot, darted wildly across the ceiling as if seeing something no one else could. A child sobbed softly in the back of the church, muffled by the panicked murmurs of the congregation. Some had begun to pray aloud, their voices overlapping in desperate whispers. An elderly woman clutched her rosary so tightly her knuckles turned white, her lips moving feverishly as she recited, "Deliver us, O Lord, from every evil and grant us peace in our days." The priest remained still, his hand never leaving the silver cross that hung from his neck. His gaze locked onto the writhing man before him, unwavering. What started as screams changed into unrecognizable snarls, and the attacker's throat rattled in a way that wasn't quite human. A sharp chill swept through the air, unnoticed by those whose hearts pounded too loudly to register it. But for those near the altar, a creeping dread settled within their bones. A woman, standing just a few feet away, shuddered violently, tears streaming down her face as she murmured, "This is not just madness. This is something else." Then, as if pulled by an unseen force, the man's body suddenly arched upward, his back lifting unnaturally off the cold stone floor. A strangled gasp left the lips of one of the men holding him down. The priest took a step forward, raising the crucifix higher, his voice firm but calm. "If you are of darkness, you hold no power here." The moment the words left his lips, the man's body slammed back onto the floor, limbs twitching violently. A shudder ran through him before his eyes rolled back, his entire form going eerily still. For a brief, deafening moment, silence reigned. Then he let out a deep exhale, his chest heaving as if something had been torn from within him. His expression twisted, a mix of exhaustion and eerie relief, as if waking from a nightmare. But the question lingered in everyone's mind. Was it truly over? There are things we may never fully understand, but guidance is within reach. Copies are running out. Don't miss your chance in the pinned comment. A heavy stillness settled over the church, interrupted only by the ragged breaths of the man lying on the cold stone floor. His chest rose and fell in uneven gasps, his fingers twitching as though grasping at something invisible. The men who had restrained him hesitated, their grips loosening slightly, unsure if the danger had truly passed. The murmurs of the congregation swelled once again, whispers of uncertainty and fear rippling through the pews. Someone near the back muttered, "Is he possessed?" Another voice, trembling, responded, "Or just sick." A woman in a blue shawl clutched her rosary, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have seen things like this before. Not madness, not drugs, something darker." Others exchanged uneasy glances, their own thoughts mirroring her fears. A sudden metallic clang broke the tension, the knife, still lying where it had been kicked aside, glinting under the dim church lights. A young man, standing cautiously near it, swallowed hard before reaching down and grabbing the weapon with shaking hands. His knuckles turned white as he held it away from his body, as if it carried something unseen, something tainted. The priest took a slow step forward, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "We do not know what battles this man is fighting, but we know that faith is stronger than fear." He turned to the congregation, his eyes scanning the uneasy faces before him. The man on the ground let out a low groan, his body weak and drained. His lips trembled as he tried to form words. I didn't want to." His voice cracked, barely audible, filled with something that sounded almost like regret. At that moment, a uniformed officer stepped into the church, his presence sharp against the dim, candle-lit interior. The murmurs hushed as the officer's gaze moved from the congregation to the man lying on the ground. He reached for his radio, speaking in hushed tones before stepping forward. "We need to take him in." His words, though firm, carried no malice, only duty. The air hung heavy with unanswered questions. But one thing was clear: this night had changed them all. The officer stepped forward cautiously, his eyes scanning the man still sprawled on the cold church floor. His body was weak and his limbs were shaking from being so tired, but his eyes were still and blank. He no longer fought, no longer resisted. Whatever force had seized him moments ago had loosened its grip, leaving only a hollow, drained shell. One of the older men who had restrained him finally released his grip, rubbing his sore wrists. Another crossed himself before stepping back, shaking his head as if unable to comprehend what had just unfolded. The congregation remained tense, their breaths shallow, their movements hesitant. "We need to get him outside," the officer instructed, gesturing toward the church entrance. Two men stepped in to help, lifting the attacker under the arms, his legs dragging slightly as they guided him toward the door. He didn't resist. He didn't speak. His head hung low, his body limp, as if he had been emptied of whatever had possessed him. When faced with the unknown, having the right knowledge can make all the difference. A few copies of our ebook are available. Claim yours now before they're gone. A soft gasp came from an elderly woman standing near the aisle. "Look at his face," she whispered. The murmurs grew again as more people noticed what she meant. The wild rage that had once distorted his expression was gone. In its place was something fragile, almost childlike. His lips moved slightly, as though he was muttering something, but no sound escaped. The officer turned to the priest. "Has he done this before?" The priest shook his head. "Not here. But we do not know where he came from, nor what torments him." At the entrance, the night air hit his face, and for the first time since he stormed into the church, the man blinked, as if waking from a long, terrible dream. His breath hitched, his fingers curled weakly, and then a single tear rolled down his cheek. If this message makes you think and you feel it connects with you, don't forget to like it, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment. Also, if you really want to support our work and help us keep creating valuable content, consider giving us a super thanks. Join this amazing community and don't miss any news. The officer nodded toward his partner, signaling him to take over. The doors closed behind them, leaving behind only the echoes of whispered prayers and the weight of the inexplicable. The priest turned back to the congregation. The mass had been interrupted, shaken, even threatened. But it was not over. Without hesitation, he stepped back toward the altar, lifted his hands, and began once more. Let us continue.